good afternoon, depending on where you're located, but I like to welcome you. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this impactful advocacy workshop. I am Terry Murray, and I chair the FNINR Advocacy Committee. We have a very exciting program planned for you today, and we're featuring three very accomplished Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health Policy Fellows. Each panelist will spend approximately 10 minutes sharing their insights and their inspiring policy projects. Afterward, we will have a 15-minute question answer session. So I strongly encourage you to jot down your questions as the panelists present their projects. We're very hopeful for a very dynamic question and answer session. Then this program was also planned by our advocacy committee, and many of them are on this call. I see a few of them, and we'll acknowledge them at the end. So without further ado, I will introduce the panelists in alphabetical order. Because they are so extremely accomplished, I've extrapolated just a few things from their bios. Otherwise, it would take the full hour to read the bios. So following their introductions, they will begin to share their policy projects with you. So I'll start with Dr. Kristen Ashford. And Kristen, if you can signal who you are, but people see your name.
Hello, everyone.
Dr. Kristen Ashford is a professor, women's health nurse practitioner, and researcher at the University of Kentucky College of Nursing. And she's also a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Dr. Ashford serves as the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Faculty and Interprofessional Education. She's also the director of the Perinatal Research and Wellness Center. She's an internationally known expert in the field of perinatal tobacco use, immune response research, and preterm birth. Next, I will introduce Dr. Brenda Baker. Dr. Brenda Baker is there, and her name is in her Hollywood square, as I say. Dr. Baker is the Director of Policy for the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. Dr. Baker's work has focused on the care of women and newborns, maternal well-being, and advocating for incarcerated, pregnant, and postpartum women. In a unique partnership between the Georgia Department of Corrections and Emory University, the Georgia Prison Motherhood Project was formed. Through the partnership, volunteers provide prenatal education, labor support, and a postpartum support group for women in the Georgia Department of Corrections. And lastly, but certainly not least, I will introduce Dr. Sharon Crowder. Dr. Crowder is a clinical associate professor at Indiana University School of Nursing and special assistant to the dean for health policy initiatives. As special assistant to the dean for health policy initiatives, Dr. Crowder collaborates with IU government relations. She engages with state directors and stakeholders on legislation related to IU School of Nursing and the nursing profession. She is known for developing 7 innovative models to empower nursing students, faculty, and healthcare providers in clinical practice for health policy and advocacy roles. So without further ado, I turn it over to our 3 panelists.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. Really appreciate that warm introduction. I just wanted to give a brief overview of what we'll be talking today, and also let you know, please feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and if not, we will have some Q&A time following the panel. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what RWJ is, talk about where we were placed, and give a little bit of information of background about our primary project. We also wanted to spend some considerable time sharing with you tips that we learned in preparation for a pre-meeting with a congressional or state representative or executive branch officer during the meeting and after the meeting, and then specifically learning how that aligns with your role as an FNIR ambassador. So we would really love to also share some maybe ideas about how potential grant work and stories can help support a really successful and impactful advocacy section on the Hill or in your state offices. So I'm going to ask first Dr. Brenda Baker just to share a little bit of overview about the RWJ Health Policy Program. And I also want to acknowledge Kamhi, who's also here with us, that it has also been a fellow. And so Brenda, you would like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much. And to begin with, thanks everybody for being part of FNIR and in your own way promoting this work. So just a little bit about the fellowship that's offered through RWJ. If you look at the website and you look at prior fellows, you might think, oh, I can't do it. That was my first thought when my dean suggested I apply for it. And that is a thought you should completely erase from your thought process. So RWJ, their whole mission is about a culture of health. And one of the ways that they accomplish that is that they bring, mid-career successful professionals to DC for a year. And for the first 14 weeks of that, you are immersed almost as if you're in graduate school in health policy at the federal level. And following that, or near the end of it, you start visiting offices and committees on the Hill and looking for a place that you want to work the next year. And when you find one that you like, then you contact that office and you ask, can I work for you? And, everybody who is an RWJ fellow has been an accomplished leader. And this is a big step back to being a learner and really letting yourself be vulnerable to, I don't know how this works, but I know a lot of stuff. And then you get your placement and you just are right in the thick of it from day one. My orientation consisted of, here's the office supplies, here's your workspace, here's a project. And you really have to be ready to jump in with both feet, but it is transformational. Nobody's the same after they work on the Hill for a period of time. And you're part of that office. You contribute your knowledge about healthcare, other professionals that that might contribute to the topic. And, I have a solid maternal newborn background, but I worked in every space. I had never really cared much about Medicare until I was in that office. And I learned a lot about Medicare in that period of time I was in the office. I was really fortunate. I worked in Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana in his office. And the reason I was really attracted to that office was the lead of the health team was a great leader. She had a great reputation from prior fellows. And he also sat on the HELP committee where the health legislation goes in the Senate and on the finance committee. So he had a big committee jurisdiction of topics to work on. So I'm going to pass it over to Sharon now, who's going to talk about her experience on the Hill.
Good afternoon, and it's such a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon. I recognize a lot of names, and so I know that these are colleagues, and I look forward to the dialogue that we will have after our presentation. I was a 2019-2020 fellow, and my placement was with the Education, and at that time it was called Education and Labor, it's now Education and Workforce Committee. At that time, I served on the majority committee with Congressman Bobby Scott as the chair of that committee. And I was assigned to the health policy team. I wanted to go into a committee because I had a experience in working with our Indiana delegation and working with different offices, and I wanted to challenge myself by looking at the committee responsibilities and to gain from those particular perspectives, and I definitely did. Two of the major things I will highlight, and as I was thinking about this, I was like, wow, Brenda or Kristen would have been more in alignment because one of my areas of focus was maternal health. I'm a pediatrics nurse and I have a background in that, but because I teach health policy as my area of focus. And then also in looking in at health policy, some of the advocacy roles and moving forward at state and federal levels, I knew that I had somewhat of a background in order to delve into the bills and the legislation being done. But as Kristen and Brenda identified, and I will reinforce, it's a learning curve. Those of you who looked at your doctoral programs, think about that first day when you felt like you were in the hot seat, trying to decide on your dissertation topic, trying to narrow it. And certainly what I appreciated was that I was with a phenomenal team who supported, who respected where I was as a mid-career provider and educator, and also that, but they knew that my learning curve was steep as far as from a committee standpoint. Two of the things that I worked on, maternal health, looking at the PUMP Act. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was an example of an act that we introduced in 2019, 2020, didn't move forward until 2022. And now I'm looking at some of the implications in practice of 2024. But when I go back to that congressional record, I see a lot of my work there. The other bandwidth that I had that was definitely influential, and that was telehealth. And so I was there as we moved into COVID and made all those strides with telehealth, where we had not had those accomplishments. The other thing was that after I left, I came back to do some work at the state level on telehealth. So you'll hear more about my story in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And I just wanted to also share my experience similar to what Brenda and Sharon had mentioned about when I first saw, was looking for, do I want to do a sabbatical? Do I want to do a fellowship? I was at the point in my career, I was looking for that next step. I thought, well, yeah, there's no way I can do this, because when you looked at the history of all of the different members, it was very, very few nurses. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. Maybe this is not, maybe I need to look for a different type of fellowship. But I did search through, I found Dr. Sharon Crowder's name there, and I thought, you know what, she was inspirational to me, both to Brendan and myself. So I just want to pause and tell you all that it takes a phenomenal advocate and mentor, and she, likely for Brenda and myself, if we wouldn't have had Sharon and her encouragement, I don't know that we would have applied nor been selected. So thank you so much, Sharon. A funny story about that is that she was helping us, just kind of talk about the process when we had both reached out to her independently. I didn't know Brenda didn't know me, Sharon didn't know either of us. And she's like, oh my, there's two nurses reaching out to me, and I know probably two are not going to get in. But she was mentoring us, and the interview process is very important. So she said, you need to go, tell me what you're going to wear. I'm like, well, I'll just, wear, a nice shirt. No, I need to see what you're going to wear. And I said, well, okay, I'll send it to you. No, you need to go get changed right now and show me what you're going to wear. And so I ran to my closet, got a few things out. She's like, no, that's not going to work. No, that's not going to work. But I ultimately did find some appropriate clothing approved by Dr. Sharon Crowder. So I think it was helpful. But more getting back on track regarding my placement, similar to Sharon, I wanted to be a part of a committee. That's where I felt there was my biggest learning curve. I didn't really understand how all the legislation worked. And so one of the common themes we'd said, we want to be where we see the sausage being made. And I didn't know House or Senate. You could also choose executive branch offices. There's somebody in the Surgeon General's office right now. There's people that have worked with the office of the vice president. But I did know I wanted to work on a committee. And so, looking at the different committees, I chose the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Well, I'll just own this. 5 years ago, I did not know that the Energy and Commerce Committee had a health subcommittee. And interestingly, the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee is the largest committee, has the largest jurisdiction for health in the entire nation. It's huge. So the Health Subcommittee really has jurisdiction over anything that is related to NIH, CDC, SAMHSA, community health programs, public health preparedness. it's an enormous health related agency. We also have a person that works specifically on Medicaid, one that works specifically on Medicare, and one that was specifically on the FDA. And then my piece was everything else, which was NIH, CDC. And so it was a really amazing experience. When I was there, I was on the minority health committee staff. On my area, there was 6 staffers, and there was 4 women, 2 men, and 3 of the 4 had the name Kristen. It's just a side note I thought was funny. So they're like, oh gosh, another Kristen. But it was an amazing experience, and I learned so much. And most importantly, you go in as trying to become a policy analyst. We all have our own personal beliefs, philosophies, biases, not biases, but that's not what the committee is for. The committee is really for being a policy analyst and trying to work together as a team to get legislation passed for the nation. And I think when we all presented at the National Academy of Medicine, somebody asked me, well, what were you most surprised about? And I was most surprised that the minority and the majority committee members, I'm sure Jenna or Brenda would speak with that as well. We all actually really liked each other, and we got a lot of work accomplished. The second year I was on the majority committee, but we all extended a bit to stay a little bit longer. But I also chose because the Kentucky Congressman Brett Guthrie was he was the ranking member, now the chair of the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, and he was actually my congressman. So it was a win-win for me to have that home state connection. So what we'll go on to next, if you're okay, is I'll have Brenda share a little bit about her main project, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Brenda will go through our projects, then we'll get into really what we want to do is kind of share how to best advocate on the Hill for our ambassadors.
Thanks. Every fellow remembers the big things that happened in our nation and on the Hill while we were there. And during my year in Senator Cassidy's office, the Uvalde shooting happened. And as unfortunate as that was, both Democrats and Republicans came together and in a really short period of time wrote and passed the Safer Communities Act. And even though it didn't go as far as we might like it to go, it did a lot. It put money into the communities to address mental health among youth. So it was really amazing to work in spaces where, the media tells you we don't work together, but there were 6 offices in the Senate that came together, 3 Ds and 3 Rs, and over the course of about 10 days wrote that piece of legislation. So it was nonstop meetings, reaching out to advocates, reaching out to states. So it was really amazing. And the other thing that happens are the people who come to your office to, share their opinion. And there are people who come and meet with staff, and there are people who come and meet with the senator. So while we were working on that Safer Communities Act, Dr. Phil came to our office. Matthew McConaughey also came because he was from Uvalde. That's where he grew up. So you see a variety of people who come to the office to meet with your leader. The other really amazing piece of work that I got to do was I wrote a report for Senator Cassidy on nursing workforce. And we as citizens probably inaccurately assume that they know everything. Well, they're really smart people, but it's their staff that really get the work done. And a big piece of that report was really about what is nursing and how do we get educated and what does our workforce need to address some of the issues that we're faced with right now, and explaining that to them. So I have seen a couple little pieces of that have popped up in legislation. And you also have to realize that nothing happens very quickly in Congress. I think it took, 10 Congresses to pass the ACA legislation. It didn't happen in just one Congress or one administration. So the work that you do and the advocacy that you provide to the staff and the leaders really can be impactful. You just have to be patient. So I'll turn it
Thank
over.
you. Yes, Sharon.
So I'm going to kind of transition a little bit. I shared with you two areas that I focused on, and I'm going to emphasize to you the importance, and again, this aligns with all of your roles, no matter whether, Joan, you asked whether everybody is in academia or others in practice, and it's several. Yes, we have those in academia. In my cohort, I was the only nurse, and I was in academia, and then we had one other person, two others, and we had a total of 6 with ours. So one of the psychologists was in academia, and one of the social workers had a dual as a researcher and doing her with her research. But most of us had either some additional area of focus. In addition to our teaching, we had research, service, and other endeavors. We also had 3 physicians in my cohort. So we've had nurses. We certainly, through the years, only about 10, we have only had less than 10% of the Robert Wood Johnson Fellows over the 50 years have been nurses. But I want to take you to the hill as far as the perspective, and this aligns with your work as ambassadors. And with in mind, one of the things I found was, number one, the importance of stakeholder organizations engaging with committees. And you often think about them engaging with personal offices, but committees are important. One of the things that I did was to take stakeholder meetings related to our committee. So I knew that when we had organizations to come, they already had something identified. They weren't coming to plan. They had already had potential legislation. They had done all the background work. They looked at who could be informed. So your stakeholder organizations are important. And you might think about only, we do a great job, I think, of advocating in our personal offices and with certain committees, but think about as you move forward. There are sometimes that there are ideas that you might have and you want to put forward. And this is not only with FNINR, it's other organizations that you're in. What's the power of your stakeholder organization? The second thing I want to talk about is testimonies. How did they identify? And that was one of the things that I learned because I was a part of that. How do they decide who they're going to invite to testify for a committee? I'll try to continue. My day job is so I'll continue in just a minute. Krista knows this. So this is my real life, is that the Indiana General Assembly is meeting and my dean is texting me, and fortunately, we had one committee hearing that we were over with. So let me finish mine. If you see me go off camera, I am not ignoring you, but I need to go to who pays my paycheck, and then I'll come back to you. But let me quickly say on the testimonies, I found, how did they decide who would testify? The first thing is that the staffers will go and to Google who's one of the top researchers in this. Who are people who have testified before? Who are those particular people who are engaging and aligning with this particular area of the topic? And so I think it's important that, and nothing against my colleagues who are physicians, but often they immediately think about going to physicians when we talk about healthcare issues. So I think it's one of the things that we need to do more so and be strategic as a nursing profession in putting out there, making sure that we have alignment. The other thing that I noticed, and they pull this out, that there are a number of colleges and universities across the country who are used to doing this. So what are they going to do? They're going to keep going back to those particular places, right? And so if you are looking at, one of the things that you can do is to work with your government relations department from your state, and certainly if you have a federal office, which most of us do, and let them know the expertise that your school has as far as researchers, so they can also be a part of that. Also, the lobbyists with the different organizations. The other thing I wanted to point out was how our committee would contact lobbyists and government relations people to say, who do you have who might be an expert in this particular area? Finally, what I will say is I'm going to hop over negotiations. And one of the things that you have to understand, and I was a part of, I was on the majority, but we met with the minority in order to move things forward. So, you know, some of you might say, why didn't this move forward? I had this part in my legislation. Why? And sometimes it means that you take a bite of it, you know, and it passes this, and then you come back the next year, setting the tone for the next one. And finally, when I was there, I had the wonderful opportunity to attend appropriations meetings, the funding meetings, the dialogue about what would get done and all. But it was important for me, and I appreciated that my team respected me to say, okay, let's look at these things. What are the different providers? What are the different patient populations this will impact? How will it impact? Who can we get to support us? And NINR, NIH funding, and then specifically NINR would be a part of the appropriations. But as you look at other agencies that we work with, that we get funding from and our grant funding, please be aware that your voice about appropriations is so important, and that's across the board. So I'm going to step out, answer my dean, and I'll be right back.
Well, I'm going to build on some of the great tips and conversation that Sharon talked about regarding testimony. And so I believe it was 2 years ago, it might have been, Brenda, it might have been, I know it was in the Senate when Dr. Cynthia McCurran from AACN testified for Title VIII funding. It was she was in the Senate Health Committee. I'm not sure what the bill was, but she testified on behalf. And she did mention in her testimony NINR funding. I do recall that, you know, when she's advocating for I think it was nursing workforce potentially, it could have been a workforce issue legislation. And so that was an excellent example. And she's been called, and AACN has been called on many different times to provide input and their recommendation or not recommendation on specific legislations. Also, just to take a step back and think about a day in the life. You've heard, you know, Brenda's talking about, she gets to see Matthew McConaughey, no fair. But that was very rare that we had a day like that. But, you know, going in, and you don't know sometimes what your day's going to look like. It could be a day that you had 4 to 5 different key stakeholder meetings. We would take the meetings within the first day. I almost maybe second hour, first day, I was taking a meeting with, it could have been the president of the American Diabetes Association or the AMA or double AMC, or it could have been a think tank group, or it could have been a new private organization or a nonprofit. I mean, it was all over the place. So it could have been taking those key stakeholder meetings. They did not last more than 30 minutes. You do not get more than 30 minutes. So what we'll talk about a little bit later is the pitch, but that is one of the pieces. We also would do interviews on different people to testimony. You invite a lot of people to see if they're interested, but then you interview essentially the people that are going to testify, because you want to understand, you know, their points of view, and how they're going to testify on behalf or not on behalf of the legislation. So just because you might be asked doesn't mean you'll be ultimately selected for that. I think this first week, Brenda I'm sure remembers this for me because I was panicking. They said, well, ARPA-H was a big piece of legislation I worked on. It was the creation of this new federal agency, Advanced Projects Research for Health, and it's modeled after DARPA, which is the defense agency in the Department of Defense that was responsible for creating Sputnik, in response to Sputnik, but it created the global positioning systems. You might know of something called the internet. It created the internet. And so obviously lots of funding going into huge projects for defense, but they had to be, you know, very timely, milestone driven, high risk, high rewards. And so when I was in the first couple weeks of my fellowship, they were talking about ARPA-H and trying to pass legislation to create this new agency. And it was the premise was we want to do with health what DARPA does for defense. And so they were really looking at, what are some areas of health that we really haven't made big progress on. A lot of the different cancers came up. Pancreatic cancer came up a lot. Diabetes treatments came up. New innovative ways to do internal scanning. Those are some of the examples they used during the legislation to say these are the things that we haven't made progress in, we need to. So it was a very interesting time, and that was my primary project. And I got to work a lot on that, actually help write some of that legislation. And it was a fabulous experience. But how I got to that point is they said, we're going to be working on a lot of the ARPA-H legislation. We're going to have a hearing of it. Kristen, why don't you do the opening comments for the ranking member? I'm like, oh my goodness. And so it was just an exercise, but I took it, I don't know how many hours I spent trying to do, 3 paragraphs of opening comments. Well, I did the best I could, and you don't get much direction. And so I submitted them. Of course, they have a whole PR team that helps write it. And I think in the whole 3 to 4 paragraphs that I wrote, they probably took maybe 5 sentences, and then they, which was great because I'm like, oh my gosh, I wrote that sentence. But we also, in addition to writing comments, we also help write questions for our members in the hearings, asking them what kind of questions to ask. So it could be anything that day. And they also had a lot of great fun events that we got to do, and a lot of good learning experiences and professional development in health policy as well. But that was my experience. And Sharon, I just also just shared with them that the only thing I really talked about, the meeting piece that we want to get to, was that no group really got more than 30 minutes in meetings. And so I was going to, unless Brenda, you want to share anything before we move on to kind of the pre-after meeting piece?
I would just encourage you to always know that you have something to add, whatever the topic is, if it's your area. So don't hesitate to answer a request for information or make a comment, or just contact an office and share what you know about a given topic. It doesn't have to be you're going to the Hill for a meeting or you're attending a hearing or something specific. But if you see something, even in the news, that is your area of expertise, share that with the office. You just don't know what impact that can have.
Sharon, would you like to share a little bit about pre-meeting and during the meeting?
Sure. So I'm going to focus on 2 particular areas. The first one would be your background. What are you going to do to prepare for the meeting? And as you all know, most of you have been on the Hill. You've done a Hill visit or are engaged at the state level. The most important thing is get to know who you are going to visit. And these things are not rocket scientists. I mean, we do it all of the time. When we're preparing for a meeting, we get to know who are we going to be engaging with. And I suggest that you certainly use their websites as a basis for getting to know them. Go into the biography of the particular member that you're going to be meeting with. Look at any kind of alignment, any kind of interest, similarity. They graduated from the same university that you did, or you had a family member who graduated from some particular university. Look also at the committees. The second thing would be committees. What committees do they serve on? Because if there is a committee that they serve on in alignment with the FNINR talking point, you want to make sure that you know that. That's a one up in order for you to say, I know that this person serves on the committee. And I'd like to be able to talk about this as related to the role on the committee. If that person does not serve on the committee, then share with the office. You will get back with them when the bill advances, so that they are aware of when it's being heard in the Senate or in the House, so that you can go on and then as a member, as a constituent, you can inform that particular staffer. The next thing is look at what previous legislation they have sponsored. In other words, what's their area of interest? Whether you might think, oh, they have no interest in health, for example, but are they in transportation? Because we know that transportation influences our patients and our families' access to care, right? Or if we're looking at if they're on the insurance committee, well, that definitely aligns with everything that we're doing when we're talking about payment. Don't forget that if there's anything related to economics, related money talks. And so anything related to the economic standard of what you're talking about, then make sure you make that alignment. The other thing that we all know is looking in and a number of people from the particular standpoint of the perspective of what is it that they have such an interest in for you as a constituent, things that are happening in your state, and then personally for them. Now, you don't want to ride that too much, but if you happen to hear that they have a personal interest in a particular area, and that is your area of research or that's your area of focus, then help to align how your particular expertise can help them to elevate particular legislation. The other thing I would share is identifying and finding alignment for building your relationships. It's about building the relationships prior to who you know, who knows them. Yes, you know, you were invited and they had the commonalities that you have, the similarities that you have. And then, so that's the background, the foundation of what you want to do in order to be prepared. I remember as a doctoral student, and I put in the committees that my members were on, and you know how doctoral students, and if some of you all are with AACN Student Policy Summit and taking students to the Hill, and I had already put in there in my phone the committees that we were meeting with, and the members of Congress and their committees. And so one person said, oh, well, this doesn't apply to us. The staffer said that. And I pulled down, I said, oh, but this person, serves on this committee. And this committee, there's some alignment with this, that our talking point. And I made two particular hits. The staffer then completely changed and started talking to me. I felt a little awkward because the staffer was talking to me and not talking to the other people. But the other thing my dean said to me, I was so proud of you. You had done your homework. But as experts, we know the homework we have to do. The next thing I'll talk about is during the process. As ambassadors, what we did, there were some of us that did our meetings alone. And then there were some of us who went in with two. You know, we might have gone in and we shared a visit. And so what I would say to you is if you are going in by yourself, make sure that not only with your talking points, but get to know the staffer. You know, you hear over and over again, my colleagues, I know you all know this. You've heard over and over again, the staffers are the ones you'll probably meet with, right? The staffers are the one, but I will tell you that those staffers are the one who connect with me now to say, Dr. Crowder, what's your opinion on this upcoming legislation? What do you think we should do about this and this perspective? So get to know the staffers, get to know their interests. I particularly know that one of the staffers in one of our delegation offices is dating and will be soon engaged to a nurse. I know where that nurse works. I know her specialty area. You know, it's coming out like, congratulations on your engagement. In fact, that person I invited to our FNINR gala. So when you start talking about that, you're talking about building relationships with them so that they will reach out to you. The other thing is during the meeting, not only making the talking points and having the talking points that you know, but look at prior to who's the best person to tell the story about something. So this particular topic, number one, who's going to tell the story and align it so that it has relevance. Number two, who's going to take it and then moving it all the ways. The constituent should be the one who opens and closes with appreciation. But in between that, if there's another colleague with you, I strongly suggest that you follow through with that. So that's during the meeting. And then the other thing is we know, but we just have a sense of using our jargon, using our things that we are so aware of. And so, one of the things that I do is talk about communicating with policymakers, communicating your research. your policy endeavors with others, because we are breaking it down and making it a win-win based on what's in it for them. So thank you, Kristen.
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to ask Brenda to share any other particular do's and don'ts that you were able to observe when you were in the office, or that you would want to share. And or if you want to talk a little bit about how it's important to have, if you're doing research, align that with the legislation.
Yeah, the comment that Sharon made about be prepared is really true. And you know so much stuff about your area of specialty. So just be organized. Don't try to teach them everything that you know about a topic. Early on, in 2022, one of the issues was the infant formula crisis related to Abbott labs. And when we started working on it, because there was going to be a hearing, the lead on our team, she said, just Google it. Because I'm thinking I've got to do, scientific research about the topic. She said, no, just Google it and see what's out there. So they don't want the in-depth, life and times of the topic. They want to know the high level topics. You don't have to take them, a literature review table with 20 peer-reviewed articles to get your point across. So consider your audience and the message you want to deliver, and don't drown them in all the details that we can drown people in. I think is really important when you go to meet with staff.
So I want to piggyback on something that I think it was Linda that said that. Yes, Linda, I want to acknowledge your comment. And she was saying have something in writing. So generally, most of the organizations that I'm with, we have a package that we leave them of talking points. A lot of them will send it electronically ahead of time so that they know what we're going to talk about. And then, but I suggest that you also have a print copy when you go to take with you so that you can leave that with them. And one thing I did not say, which I know Brenda and Kristen will certainly agree with, is if there's something that's said and you don't have the answer, tell them. I would be happy to provide that information back to you. In fact, that's a good thing because then it gives you another time to engage with them and provide that particular support. But Linda, thank you so much for your comment, because it's definitely important. Most of the time when we do our pre-briefings about going to the Hill, you'll see that those talking points and what's going to be made available, but certainly make sure, and then I would include, often the talking points will be more broad. I would include additional talking points for your state, for your district, so that you are giving them that alignment.
And I'm just going to add one more piece. Sharon talked about sending them ahead of time, having a print copy for them during the meeting. But I think even to seal the deal, put a bow on the package, after the meeting, you do a follow-up email specifically related to what was important to them. You don't ever know specifically what's going to resonate with them regarding what you're presenting. You might have 5 asks, but they're usually going to be one that they're really honed in on. And so follow-up email, reattaching the talking points or narrowing down, personalizing them, thanking them is so important. And that's what really gets people's attention. And they love it when you can, if you're on a committee, they can say, well, I really would suggest that or recommend that these 3 representatives get this information, send it to these staffers, because I know that they're very much engaged in that. So knowing who, giving them recommendations on who to send it to on the committee is very helpful. You're doing some of the work for them. And I'm just going to kind of close this time. And so we have a few minutes for open discussion, just to share one of my favorite little slides that I do, if I can find it here, is just as a summary. It's what I do with my health policy students, and certainly it's very much more high level than this, but it's so important. I think one of the biggest don'ts is don't leave the meeting not have done your ask, and don't leave the meeting not given the staffer or the representative time for you to ask questions. That's the worst mistake you can make. You need to know, they need to know what your ask is, and you need to give them time to ask questions. Keep it brief. very brief, clear, concise, and I actually, while Sharon was talking, I added the word connection for C. There's nothing more than they love that is a story to tell, especially it's from their district, a constituent of theirs, a program that they were involved in. And again, having a figure, a money piece is going to really resonate them, I think, more than anything. And so we have about 12 minutes left to ask questions, and we really appreciate your interest in this topic.
Kristen, there is one question in the chat from Devin Noonan, I believe. She said, you touched a little on this, but how was your work as a policy fellow? How has your work as a policy fellow informed your own research or other work now that you're back from your time as a fellow?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it gets back to that alignment using the health policy process to really align with your research priorities. And so at that time in the office, they would use your expertise, but you didn't have your own agenda. So coming back and then learning how to most effectively use the legislative process is to understand what types of bills or legislation are in the, what I call, I don't know if you all have read the Kingdom's 3 policy streams, but making sure that your something to do with your research is really, it does have a public health interest or impact that has interest at the community, state, or federal level. So I think, you know, trying to find that piece, you know, I do perinatal health research. Well, years ago, I tried to align because electronic cigarettes and perinatal health was big. Now I've aligned my research really to look at cannabis policies because cannabis is really, you know, legislation is really growing. And so finding something, I typically, you know, use my area of interest to be responsive to real-time health policy issues. Not everybody does it that way. I don't know if there's a perfect way to do it, but that's what I've done. And then just knowing who to use as resources. You should not be doing this alone. Sharon talked about knowing your government affairs people and knowing who's on specific staffs and getting those connections. And I think Brenda also had talked about networking. Networking is so important. That was one of the biggest skill sets I think we learned in our fellowship. But I'm going to pause this. Does Brenda or Sharon, do you want to answer that question? Add anything to that?
I think it's easy to be intimidated by the process, but you shouldn't be intimidated by the process. The member of Congress and the staff work for you, and they want to hear from you. And seemingly minor comments are not ignored. At least in the office I was in, every Monday we got a summary report of all the emails, calls, letters, whatever, and it was organized into topics. And it really drove the senator's work. And one of the other things that happened our year on the Hill was the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And I think Senator Cassidy does an amazing job for Louisiana. And I was really impressed that I knew his state's opinion, the majority opinion on abortion, and that came from the calls and the letters and the emails, but I never knew his opinion on the topic, but he represented his state. And, you know, all the contacts from his constituents informed his work. So don't ever discount the value of sharing, informing, educating our leaders.
So I will quickly say that one of the things that I've done is in my role of special assistant to the Dean of Health Policy Initiatives is that I've worked more with our faculty, particularly our tenure track faculty and their research, and our PhD and DNP students, and informing, engaging them in the opportunities that they have. So aligning, for example, our faculty, their research with understanding policy implications of their work, integrating more policy and more of those particular aspects into, and being considerate of how the grant funding, for example, where's the funding coming from? What are the things that are available? How does their policy inform their research inform policy, and how does policy inform their research? And so I created a faculty mentoring program where we focus on that. And then the other thing, my students love me because when I came back from the Hill, I completely changed my policy courses, and they change every year because I am so committed to having things that are current and relevant for the time. Not only when we talk about the provision of healthcare, but the nursing profession and healthcare providers.
And one other point I'd like to add is no matter if you're in a healthcare system, you're in an academic system, you're in a community member, every project or initiative you do has a policy implication. It could be a bedside policy implication. It can be, so what I do with all of our students, and even when I work with our clinical partners across the street, when they're doing a project, I said, I insist that they include a bullet point about how this could impact either a local, community, state, or federal policy, because you will find a connection. You will find connection.
Ruth?
I just want to say thank you. This has been so informative and just such a rich discussion. I wanted to ask a couple kind of practical questions. This sounds amazing, and I wish we could like do this tomorrow, but I wanted to know, how did you practically do it in terms of with your deans? Did you do it as part of a sabbatical? And did you physically like move to DC for a whole year? Or did you kind of do it in, 3-month increments? Or, I know that you were very embedded on the Hill, but I was curious if it did require a physical move. And then my second part of my question is, I would imagine it would be hard to kind of return to, a regular academia after being in such a stimulating and rich environment where everything's moving so quickly. It sounds like many of you have been able to incorporate this content into new policy classes and things like that, but I'm curious if it did make you think about making like a bigger career pivot, or if maybe that happened for other colleagues. So anyways, kind of a two-part question. Feel free to take it whatever direction you'd like. Thank you again. This has been fantastic though.
Thank you for that question, Brenda.
Well, the fellowship is a commitment to move to DC, and you're going to want to be in DC because there's so much that you're involved in, and everybody does it differently. Kristen and I had the lucky opportunity to live in the same apartment building, so and walk to work. I even sold my car. Everybody does it a little bit differently. There was someone in our group who commuted home to Dallas almost every weekend. So it just depends on your life situation, what you can do. The fellowship does require you to step away from your academic commitments so that you can be totally immersed in the experience of the fellowship.
And mine was not a sabbatical. I was looking for a sabbatical, but it was a fellowship. And so my university didn't actually count it as a sabbatical. So I want to take one, but it's negotiation because, it's a grant. It's like, I think right around $160,000 that the university gets for this program. So it's great. And Brenda actually did have a career pivot, kind of, I think. I don't want to speak on your behalf, but she's now the policy director at AACM, but she also has still working with her Emory University. I came back to my role and I was the associate dean of undergraduate programs in IPE. I changed my focus to health policy, and I'm working with the down campus and my dean, similar to what Sharon does with her dean at Indiana. So I didn't leave my university, but my position got tweaked. And then Sharon.
So, yes, I relocated, as they said, we all had to relocate for a year. The other thing that I will say, some of you know Dr. Angela McBride, who is one of my mentors, and she challenged me a number of years prior to say, Sharon, as I share with her, she says, my dear, I think that you should apply for this fellowship. But we talked about what it would take for me to be prepared because it is quite competitive. And so I looked at what it would take over the few years in preparation for the application. And then Sting had so much support from my dean, Robin Newhouse. And then after I went back, I will be honest with you, there was a little bit of a time the next year after I returned that I stayed in communication with my cohort and with others because you're transitioning back. You've been all engaged, and when you're coming back in to reintegrate yourself for those that came back. I was fortunate in that I did some extensive things in addition to what I had done in order to be fulfilled. And I continue to do those things. But we've had those who changed completely. Some people who have moved, like Brenda, or who have changed into other positions, and then others who've moved to other particular, even academic or practice places in order to follow through with their personal or professional goals.
So it looks like we're due close to time, so I'm gonna punt it back to Terry, and thank you all so much for your interest and for your time.
Thank you all. I'd like to ask the whole group to join me in thanking our panelists. They did a fantastic job. That's Kristen, Brenda, and Sharon on sharing your experiences. We really learned a lot. So I'd like to thank you for sharing your expertise and even next steps. I think Ruth asked a fantastic question about how did this make you feel and going back to your previous job or role, because sometimes an experience like that, as you mentioned, is transformative. I like to thank our advocacy committee because they helped put this great team together and this program together. And I'd like to thank our ambassadors for participating as ambassadors and learning.